I live in northwest Italy, in the Susa Valley, just at the foot of the Alps. We are used to having wildfires, especially during dry winters. But in the fall of 2017, we had one of the worst fires in centuries. On October 22nd, the fire started and, helped by the strong winds and a very long summer drought, went on for weeks, burning more than 12,000 square miles of woods and meadows. When compared to the Australian bushfires and California wildfires, this probably doesn't seem much. But my valley is small, and I remember clearly waking up one morning and smelling smoke in the air even from far away. We were not able to see the sun and the sky for days due to the smoke. This June I went back to the burned mountains, and it hit me more than in the past. The charred and broken trees in contrast with the blooming flowers and newly sprouting trees and plants. While I was there, I started sketching some of the broken trees, and once back at home I decided to make a series of prints as portraits of some of the most badly affected ones. I also decided pretty soon that I wanted the prints to be black and white, and almost organically I chose to try to make some ink myself using pieces of charred bark that I have picked up. I decided to focus on a particular area which is at an altitude of 1500 meters, portraying trees from that area only, and making ink from the bark of silver fir and pine trees collected in the same area, and using water from a source nearby. While I was working on the design of the prints, I started to run some tests on making the ink, and after a few trials, I came up with a recipe that is quite good for printing. You can see here that the first layer of the bark is completely carbonized. This is what actually gave me the idea of trying to make Sumi in the first place. Here's the procedure I used. First, I scrape the soot from the bark using a wire brush. I pay attention to using only the very top layer. This is just a short demo of the process, but please note that I usually used gloves at this stage, and I always wore a mask while preparing the ink. At this point, there is a lot of unworked bark pieces, and I want to try to select only the finer powder. I sift the collected soot to a fine colander and double-check the powder for impurities. I then use an electric coffee grinder to grind the powder as finely as possible. At this point, the powder is ready to make ink, and I can store it until I'm ready to actually use it. You can see here the comparison with the powder before grinding it. Since I usually print with watercolor pigments, I decided to use a watercolor recipe. I also wanted to try to avoid using animal products at this stage, so I choose to use Arabic gum rather than Nikawa glue. I regenerated the Arabic gum with water sourced from the mountains, boiling it before using, and I will mix it to the soot. For this recipe, I'm also using clear honey to help with fluidity and also with preservation, and to avoid the ink developing too much mold. I'm using a ratio of 3 tablespoons of soot to 2 teaspoons of Arabic gum. I thoroughly mix the powder with the medium before starting grinding. At this point, I try to be as slow and careful as possible to avoid the powder going everywhere. Finally, I add the honey, a quarter of a teaspoon more or less, and mix it well. At this point, I'm ready for the final and longer stage. This is frankly the only tedious part of the process, as it takes a very long time and it must be done by hand only. I'm using a wide glass pestle. With an even wider one, you could probably have better and quicker results than mine. And I'm grinding the mixture by hand in a circular motion. I did a few tests, and the best results I had were by grinding and mixing for at least 1 hour. You can take a few pauses in between, but this part should definitely not be rushed. Now and then, I add a bit of water using a sprayer. I want the result to be liquid but still dense, since I usually like to use Sumi paste for my other prints. After some time you can see the ink here is much more fluid and not grainy anymore. I always taste it on some paper to be sure it doesn't need more grinding. And here's the ink ready to be used. I am also going to show the method of printing I use with this ink, since it's a little bit different from my usual way of printing. During the first printing tests, I found it quite difficult to print a dense color without a grainy gomazuri effect. And since I wanted a very light background color, I diluted the Sumi a lot, as you can see here. In addition to nori paste, I found it quite helpful to use a watercolor thickening medium called aqua pasto. And here I'm mixing it to the ink pot directly, instead of adding it to the block later, like I will do with nori. All the prints in this series are made with 2 blocks. For the first block I'm using the very diluted color with aqua pasto for the whole block, and a darker shade for the graduated bokashi at the bottom and for the tree trunk. I am printing on handmade washi from Saitama Prefecture, and I will use a Yuki baren. I often use this kind of baren for printing these flat areas. For this video I try to shorten most of the printing session, so there are a few cuts, but I'm printing the background 3 times to build up a nice and permanent color. I also find that with this particular technique, the black color doesn't brighten too much once dried. All the printing session at this point took mostly the same amount of time, except for the bokashi on the tree trunk, which I skipped in the final passage, as you can see here. Once I'm happy with the results, I let the printed sheets of paper to dry and rest for at least one day. Once the paper is perfectly dry and the color has set completely, I can dampen the paper again and print the second block. I want this to be a strong, rich black, and I use a very dense Sumi at this point. Again, I want to build a rich but dry color, so I'm keeping the paper drier than with the previous block. I'm also using a different baran, lighter, and applying a very gentle pressure in order to preserve the details of the finely carved branches. For this reason, to achieve the strong black I want, I need to print this block over and over. So I need to pay particular attention to the registration. Here I'm printing the black block 4 times. The very last time will be just a touch of ink on the trunk. For this project, I made 20 small prints, each in an edition of 25, and also made a special limited edition of 5 large sheets, mounting all the trimmed prints on a bigger sheet of the same handmade washi I used to print the original smaller ones. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration and thank you for watching.